I never believed in those weird internet stories. You know, the ones about people slipping through reality, ending up in strange, impossible places where nothing makes sense. I thought they were just creepypasta fiction, just stories meant to freak people out. That was before it happened to me. Before I fell through. Before I ended up here. It started on an ordinary day, just like any other. I was walking home from work, my head pounding from staring at a screen all day, my mind foggy with exhaustion. I took the same route I always did, passing the same old buildings, the same coffee shop on the corner, the same graffiti-stained alley that cut through the block. But this time, something was different. I don't know how to explain it, but the air felt heavier. The world around me seemed muffled, like I was underwater. I remember my foot catching on something, a crack in the pavement, maybe, or just my own exhaustion making me clumsy. I fell forward, expecting to hit the cold concrete, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, the world around me shifted. It was like stepping through a thin layer of reality, like the universe had glitched for just a second, and suddenly, I was somewhere else. The first thing I noticed was the smell. A horrible, damp, musty stench that filled my nostrils, making my stomach churn. The air was thick with it, stale and wrong, like a room that had been sealed off for decades. I looked around, heart hammering, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a massive, seemingly endless maze of empty, yellow-tinted rooms. The walls were covered in peeling, faded wallpaper, the kind that looked like it belonged in a cheap motel from the 70s. The ceiling buzzed with the sound of flickering fluorescent lights, their glow casting long, unnatural shadows on the stained, moldy carpet below my feet. There were no windows, no doors, just endless, identical hallways stretching into the distance. I turned in circles, trying to find something, anything, that made sense. But the more I looked, the more disoriented I became. Every hallway looked the same. Every turn led to another identical corridor, another empty space that felt just as wrong as the last. I tried retracing my steps, but nothing changed. The rooms stretched on forever, warping and shifting in a way that made my stomach twist. I checked my phone, desperate for a map, for a signal, anything. But there was nothing. No bars. No Wi-Fi. Just a battery percentage that seemed to be draining faster than normal. That was when I heard it. A sound. Distant but unmistakable. At first, it was just a faint tapping, like footsteps echoing off the walls. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. I held my breath, straining my ears, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. Then it got closer. A soft shuffle, then another. And another. Something was moving in the halls. I wasn't alone. I turned, heart pounding, and started walking in the opposite direction, my footsteps muffled against the damp carpet. The sound behind me grew louder, no longer a distant noise but something real. Something near. I broke into a run. The hallways blurred around me as I sprinted forward, turning corners at random, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was back there. The lights above me flickered erratically, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. My breathing was ragged, my legs burning, but I didn't stop. Then I saw it. A shape. A figure, just at the edge of my vision, standing still in the dimly lit hallway. It wasn't right. Its proportions were all wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't have a face, at least not one that I could see. Just a dark, shifting void where its features should have been. It stood motionless for a second, as if studying me. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't lunge. It just stepped forward. And that was enough to send me sprinting again. I took another turn, then another. The walls around me seemed to pulse, the space warping like I was trapped inside something alive. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know if I was running towards safety or deeper into this nightmare. Then, ahead of me, I saw something impossible. A door. A real solid door. Not another hallway, not another endless loop of yellow walls, but an actual way out. I pushed forward, lungs burning, my body screaming for me to stop, to rest, but I couldn't. The thing behind me was coming. I could hear it now, long, dragging footsteps. A sound like breathing. I reached for the door. And then, my fingers closed around the cold metal handle, slick with sweat. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the flickering hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I twisted the knob, praying, begging, that it would open. It didn't. The door didn't budge. I yanked at it again, harder this time, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was locked. Or stuck. Or maybe it wasn't even real. Maybe it was just another cruel trick of this endless, shifting maze. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, thick and suffocating. I turned my head slowly, every muscle in my body screaming at me not to. It was there. Closer now. The figure stood just a few feet away, its long, unnatural limbs casting warped shadows against the stained wallpaper. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. But I could feel it watching me, even without eyes. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat had closed up, my body frozen in pure, primal terror. Then, without warning, it twitched. Not a step. Not a lunge. Just a sharp, convulsive jerk, like a marionette with its strings suddenly pulled too hard. And then it tilted its head. Not in curiosity. Not in confusion. But in recognition. It knew me. A deep, rattling noise filled the hallway. At first, I thought it was the lights flickering again. But then I realized. It was laughing. A sound that didn't belong in this world. A sound that made my stomach twist, my vision blur, my mind scream at me to run. I slammed my fists against the door, panic taking over. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I didn't care about where I was or how I got here. I just wanted out. The thing took another step. Then another. Each movement was wrong, jerky, like it was struggling to hold its form, like reality itself was rejecting its presence. The door still wouldn't open. I could feel it behind me now. Close enough that the air turned ice cold. Close enough that I swore I could hear it whispering. Not words. Not anything human. Just a low, warbling static, like a broken radio tuned to something that shouldn't exist. My hand fumbled along the doorframe. My fingers brushed something metal. A keyhole. I didn't think. I just acted. I reached into my pocket, searching for anything, some kind of key, some kind of... My fingers closed around something cold and jagged. I didn't stop to question it. I didn't stop to wonder how it got there. I shoved the key into the lock and twisted. Click. The door swung open. I fell through, my body hitting the floor hard, pain jolting up my arms and knees. I scrambled forward, kicking the door shut behind me with every ounce of strength I had left. For a moment, there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Just my own gasping breaths echoing in the dark. Then, the handle started to turn. Slowly. Deliberately. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. The space beyond the door was different. It wasn't yellow. It wasn't buzzing with flickering lights. It wasn't endless hallways twisting in impossible directions. It was dark. A long, black corridor stretching far beyond what my eyes could see. The walls were smooth metallic, pulsing faintly like they were alive. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stop. Then up ahead. Another door. A different one. It wasn't old and rotting like the first. It was sleek. Modern. White. There was something strange about it, something familiar. And then I saw it. A sign. A single, small plaque bolted to the door. It had a name on it. My name. I stopped. My heart thundered in my chest. My skin felt ice cold. This wasn't possible. I had never been here before. But the door, it was mine. The handle turned. Not by me. From the other side. The handle twisted slowly, as if whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was hesitating, savoring the moment before revealing itself. My breath caught in my throat, my entire body screaming at me to run, but my feet were rooted to the cold, pulsing floor. Then the door creaked open. A sliver of darkness peeked through the gap. It wasn't like the void behind me, the endless black corridor stretching into nothingness. This darkness was different, thicker, heavier, like it was pressing outward, trying to escape through the crack in the door. A shadow moved. Not a shape, not a figure. Just a presence. Something shifting in the blackness, just beyond my sight, waiting. And then, a hand. Pale, too pale. Long fingers, unnaturally thin, curling around the edge of the door. They didn't grip. They just rested there, motionless, as if testing the air, tasting my fear. I stepped back. The hand moved. Not toward me. Not away. Just a subtle shift, like it was getting comfortable, adjusting to this reality. I wanted to turn and run, but something deep inside me whispered that if I did, I'd never get another chance to leave. I forced myself to speak. Who's there? Silence. Then a voice. My voice. Faint. Distorted. Like hearing a recording of yourself played backward at half speed. You know who I am. The words slithered through the air, wrapping around my brain like a parasite burrowing deep, making itself at home. I shook my head. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. The hand slid down the edge of the door. I stepped back again. It stepped forward. Not walking. not moving like a person, just appearing closer each time I blinked, like reality was skipping frames, like it wasn't bound by the same rules as me. I reached behind me blindly, searching for anything, another door, a wall, a way out. My fingers met only the cold, pulsing floor, endless and unyielding. The figure stepped fully into view. It was me. Almost. The same height, the same posture, the same clothes. But the face was wrong. The features were just slightly off, like an artist had tried to paint me from memory and failed. The eyes were too large, too dark, swallowing the dim light around them. The mouth was too wide, lips curling upward in a smile that didn't belong on my face. The other me tilted its head. "You're not supposed to be here." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The other me stepped closer. Too close. I felt the air shift, the temperature drop. It leaned in. Its lips barely moved, but I heard it perfectly, the words sinking into my bones. "You left the door open." A chill ran through me. My stomach twisted. "What?" I whispered. It grinned wider. "You left the door open." The lights flickered. The walls shook. Something moved in the darkness behind me. The corridor wasn't empty anymore. There were things in it now. Tall, wrong, crawling over the smooth walls, spilling out of the void like ink bleeding through paper. And the other me, it wasn't smiling anymore. It was laughing. Low. Amused. Like it had won. And then it lunged. I pressed myself against the damp, yellowed wallpaper, my breath shallow as I listened. The distant, rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights droned on endlessly, but beneath it, I could hear something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be human. They echoed down the endless corridors, stopping, starting again, as if whoever, whatever, was moving through this place was searching. For me, I had lost track of time. It could have been hours or days since I first slipped through reality and into this impossible maze. The Backrooms. I had heard of them before, an internet legend, a cursed place where people accidentally knocklip out of existence and find themselves trapped in an infinite labyrinth of stale carpets, flickering lights, and the faint stench of something rotten. A joke. A meme. That's all I thought it was. Until it happened to me. One second, I was walking down the hallway of my apartment complex, my mind lost in thought, my hands fumbling in my pockets for my keys. Then, with a misstep, the floor beneath me felt wrong. I felt my stomach lurch as gravity shifted, and suddenly, I was somewhere else. The air was thick and heavy, pressing against my skin with an unnatural stillness. The walls stretched on forever in every direction, bathed in a sickly yellow glow. No doors, no windows, just the endless, looping nightmare of the Backrooms. I tried to stay calm at first. I told myself I had just walked into an abandoned office building, that I'd find an exit if I just kept moving. But with every turn, the hallways stretched on, repeating themselves in an unnatural way. I left scratches on the walls with my fingernails to track where I'd been, but when I passed by the same spot again, the marks were gone. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, just a murmur beneath the hum of the lights. But as I wandered deeper, they grew clearer, voices that slithered through the walls, speaking in words I didn't understand. I wasn't alone here. I never had been. That was when I heard the first sound of something moving. Not the distant voices, not the unnatural shifting of the walls, but something solid. Something real. A footstep. I ran. My legs burned as I sprinted through the endless corridors, my breathing ragged, my mind screaming that there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The footsteps behind me were slow, patient. They didn't need to chase me. They knew I had nowhere to go. I ducked into a side hallway and pressed myself into the shadows, barely daring to breathe. The air smelled different here, stale, damp, like something had been rotting for a long time. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay silent as the footsteps approached. Then for the first time I saw it. It was tall, too tall, its elongated limbs scraping against the ceiling as it moved. Its skin was stretched too tight over its frame, as if it had been wrapped in plastic and left to suffocate. No face. Just smooth, featureless flesh where eyes, a mouth, a nose should have been. It moved with unsettling grace, its long fingers twitching at its sides. And then it stopped, right in front of me. The fluorescent lights flickered. In the brief darkness, I thought I saw it turn its head, slowly, impossibly, as if it knew exactly where I was. I clamped a hand over my mouth. The lights buzzed back on. It was gone. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, waiting, listening. But the footsteps had faded into the distance. I wasn't safe, not really. But I had time. Time to find a way out. Time to learn the rules of this place. Because if the legends were true, there were rules. Whispers from those who had supposedly escaped, messages left behind in the deep corners of the internet. Stay quiet. Don't run unless you have to. The walls are watching. And most importantly, never trust what you see. I forced myself to move, step by step, pushing through the overwhelming stillness that clung to the air like a heavy fog. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, identical yet subtly shifting. I knew that if I stayed in one place too long, the backrooms would change around me, closing in, trapping me in a corner that hadn't been there before. I needed a plan. If the legends were right, if other people had really ended up here before, then someone had to know a way out. The problem was, the stories were inconsistent. Some claimed there were doors that appeared at random, portals back to reality, but you had to be quick. Others warned of staircases leading deeper, where the air grew colder, the lights dimmer, and the entities less merciful. A few even whispered about messages scratched into the walls, hints left behind by those who had survived. Or those who hadn't. I needed to find one. I kept moving, keeping my footsteps as light as possible. The humming of the lights remained a steady drone overhead, but there was something else now, a distant clicking sound, rhythmic and deliberate. I didn't want to think about what might be making it. Then I saw it. A message, scrawled into the faded wallpaper with something dark. Level 1, keep moving. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure if it was ink, dirt, or something worse. But the words sent a shiver down my spine. Level 1. Did that mean there were more levels? And if I was on level 1, what was below? I kept walking, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner that seemed to stretch into something more than empty space. My stomach twisted when I saw another message, this one lower on the wall, almost at my feet. Do not follow the voices. I swallowed hard. I hadn't heard the whispers for a while, but reading that message made me suddenly aware of how silent it had become. Then I heard it, a voice. It was soft, almost distant, like someone calling from the next room over. A single word. Hello. I froze. It sounded human. My mind screamed at me to ignore it, to keep moving. But another part of me, the part that had been alone for what felt like an eternity, wanted to believe. Maybe there was someone else here. Maybe I wasn't alone. Is someone there? The voice called again, a little closer this time. My hands clenched into fists. I took a slow, shaking breath and stepped toward the source. I turned a corner. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by flickering fluorescents. At the far end, standing in the middle of the corridor, was a person. Or at least, it looked like a person. Their back was to me, shoulders slightly hunched, head tilted downward. They were motionless. Their clothes looked strange, blurry, shifting slightly, like an image that couldn't quite focus. Something was wrong. I didn't speak. I didn't move. The figure took a step forward. I took one back. Then, in a single unnatural movement, it twisted its head, fully, impossibly, until its face was staring directly at me. Its mouth was open, but it didn't speak. I turned and ran. I knew I wasn't supposed to. I knew the rules, but panic took over. My feet pounded against the carpet as the air around me grew heavier, thicker, like I was running through a nightmare that didn't want to let me go. The lights flickered wildly now, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls. Behind me, I could hear it moving. Not running. Gliding. The clicking sound was deafening now, echoing through the halls, closing in. My vision blurred, my lungs burned, but I kept running, weaving through corridors, desperately searching for anything, any sign of escape, any hint that I wasn't running in circles. Then I saw it. A door. A real, solid door at the end of the hallway. I pushed myself forward, every muscle screaming in protest, the space behind me filled with something I couldn't see, but could feel, a presence pressing against my back. I lunged, fingers outstretched, grabbing for the handle. The lights went out. Everything plunged into darkness. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then a breath. Not mine. Directly in my ear. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My fingers were still wrapped around the door handle, slick with sweat, my entire body locked in place. The darkness wasn't empty, it was watching. Something was right behind me. The breath was slow and deliberate, just inches from my ear. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on me like invisible hands holding me in place. Then I heard it again, closer this time. A whisper. You're not supposed to be here. My grip on the handle tightened. Every muscle in my body coiled with tension. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't want to see what was breathing down my neck. Then the door handle turned. Not by me. By something on the other side. A faint crack of light appeared as the door creaked open. It wasn't bright, but it was something. A way out. My heart slammed against my ribs as I made my decision. Move. Now. With every ounce of strength I had left, I threw myself forward, bursting through the doorway. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, a shift in the air, like stepping from one reality into another. The door slammed shut behind me. Silence. For a moment, I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling. Slowly, I pushed myself up and looked around. This place was different. The walls were still yellowed, still endless, but the air felt lighter. The constant hum of the fluorescents was softer. More distant. I wasn't safe. But I wasn't where I had been before. Something had changed. Then I heard it. Not behind me this time. Ahead. A soft tapping sound, rhythmic, steady, like fingernails drumming against a wooden surface. It wasn't random. It had a pattern. It wanted me to follow. I knew I should ignore it. I knew that every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and run the other way. But there was nowhere else to go. I took a step forward. The tapping continued. Closer now. I moved carefully, one foot after the other, the corridor stretching ahead of me like a maze that had no end. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, like they were alive, breathing in sync with my own rapid heartbeat. Then up ahead I saw it. A shadow. Not moving. Waiting. It was standing perfectly still, just out of reach of the flickering light. The tapping had stopped. The air was thick with something I couldn't name. Then slowly the shadow took a step forward. It was taller than it should have been. Its limbs too long. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And then, it smiled. Not a normal smile. Not human. A grin stretched too wide, too sharp, the darkness behind its teeth shifting like something alive. I stepped back. It stepped forward. Then I heard something else. A voice. Not from the creature. From behind me. You need to run. It was different from the whispers before. Clearer. Urgent. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see movement in the corner of my vision. Someone was there. A person. A real person. And they were already running. Now, they shouted. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I ran without thinking, my feet barely touching the ground as I sprinted down the endless corridors. The lights flickered wildly now, casting long, shifting shadows that stretched and twisted along the walls. I could hear it behind me, heavy, unnatural footsteps, faster than they should have been. The person ahead of me turned a corner. Without hesitation, I followed, nearly slamming into them as they pressed their back against the wall, motioning for me to stop. Quiet, they whispered, barely audible over my pounding heart. I obeyed, sucking in shaky breaths, trying to silence the ragged gasps escaping my lips. The footsteps behind us slowed. The thing was close, too close. We waited. The air felt thick, charged, the fluorescent hum growing louder, almost vibrating inside my skull. Then silence. The footsteps had stopped. The lights flickered once more, then stabilized. The thing was gone. Or was waiting. The stranger turned to me, their face pale and eyes hollow. You shouldn't be here, they said, their voice carrying the weight of someone who had been trapped far too long. I swallowed hard. Neither should you. A sad smile crossed their lips. I've been here longer than I can remember. My stomach twisted. Is there a way out? For the first time, they hesitated. Then slowly they nodded. But you won't like it. I followed them, moving cautiously through the endless maze. Every hallway looked the same, but they seemed to know where to go, taking turns without hesitation. After what felt like forever, we reached a door. A real door. Wooden worn, slightly ajar. The stranger turned to me, their expression unreadable. Go through, and don't look back. No matter what you hear. No matter what you feel. Just keep going. I hesitated. What about you? They exhaled sharply, something flickering in their eyes. I can't leave. My stomach dropped. Why? The hum of the lights grew louder. The air shifted. It was coming back. The stranger grabbed my arm. Go. Now. I had no choice. I ran. As soon as I stepped through the door, the temperature changed. The stale, humming air of the backrooms was gone, replaced by the cold, crisp bite of reality. I collapsed onto a solid wooden floor. My apartment. I gasped for air, my body trembling. The fluorescent hum was gone. The yellow walls were gone. I was home. Shaking, I turned my head toward my door. It was locked. Secure. Safe. I exhaled in relief and pushed myself to my feet, staggering to the window. The city lights glowed, cars passed below, people walked along the sidewalks. I was back. It was over. Or so I thought, because as I turned away from the window, my phone buzzed. A single message. From an unknown number. "Did you make it out?" I stared at the screen, my hands turning cold. Then, from behind me, a soft hum, a flickering light, and a shadow stretching from the doorway. Some doors should never be opened. And some places never let you go.